Hey everyone, it's Rachel from the Addison Public Library. Thanks for joining me for Lunch Bunch. Today I'm going to read part of a short story for you. And I found this short story in Stories. So this is a collection of tales in all sorts of genres, horror, realistic, sci-fi, fantasy, and it is actually available at the library as an ebook or as an audiobook. So you could actually check it out right now. The story I'm going to read today is called Goblin Lake by Michael Swanwick. And it's a story about what it means to be a character in a story. Are we ourselves characters? Are we just going through the motions based on what the author has written for us? Or are we choosing to do what we want to do because that's what we want to do? So again, here is Goblin Lake by Michael Swanwick. In 1646, shortly before the end of the 30 Years' War, a patrol of Hessian cavalrymen fleeing the aftermath of a disastrous battle made camp at the foot of the highest mountains in the Spessart region of Germany. Among their number was a young officer named Johann von Grimmelshausen, a firebrand and habitual liar who was known to his comrades as Jurgen, which in English translates as Jack. As the front lines were distant and the countryside unwary, the patrol had picked up a great deal of food and several casks of Rhine wine. So that night, they ate and drank well. When the food was done, they called upon their guide to tell them of the countryside in which they found themselves. He, having slowly come to the opinion that they did not intend to kill him when they were done with his services, was only too happy to oblige. Directly below us, not a quarter of a mile's distance away, is the Mummelsee. In the local dialect, the name meant Goblin Lake, which is bottomless, and which changes whatever is thrown into it into something else. So that if any man were to tie up a number of pebbles in a kerchief and let it down into the water on a string, when he pulled it up, the pebbles would have turned into peas or rubies or the eggs of vipers. Furthermore, if there were an odd number of pebbles, the number of whatever they became should invariably be even. But if they were even, they would come out odd. That would be a very pretty way of making a living, Jack observed, sitting by the banks of a lake, turning pebbles into rubies. What they become is not predictable, the peasant cautioned. You cannot rely on them turning to gemstones. Even if they did so only one time in 100, well, I've spent many a day fishing with less to show for it. But it is a very dangerous place. This was the very lake which Luther said was cursed, and that if you threw a stone into it, a terrible storm immediately blows up, with hail and lightning and great winds, for there are devils chained up in its depths. No, that was in Poltersburg, Jack said. Poltersburg? The peasant spat. What does Poltersburg know of terrors? There was a farmer hereabout who had to kill his best plow horse when it broke a leg. Being of an inquiring turn of mind, he hauled its carcass to the lake and threw it in. Down it sank, and up it rose again, alive, but transformed horribly, so that it had teeth like knives, 2 legs rather than 4, and wings like those of an enormous bat. It screamed in agony and flew away into the night, no man knows where. Worse, when the carcass hit the water, some of it was splashed over the farmer's face, erasing his eyes completely, so that from that instant onward he was blind. How did he know the horse was transformed then? Jack asked with a sardonic little smile. The peasant's mouth closed, and then opened again. Jack cut him off. Why listen to your stories when we can find out for ourselves? The way down to the Mummelsee was steep and roadless, and the disposition of the soldiers was considerably soured by the time they reached it. Their grumblings, moreover, were directed as much towards Jack as toward the rascally peasant guide, for on reflection it was clear to them all that he had insisted on this journey not from any real belief that he would end up rich, but from his innate love of mischief. Oblivious to their mood, Jack sauntered to the end of a crumbling stone pier. He had brought along a double handful of fresh cherries, which he carried in his cap, and was eating them one by one and spitting their stones into the water. Suddenly, Jack rounded on the peasant savagely. You scoundrel! I have been watching the cherry stones as they sank in the water, and nothing happened to them. 1 did not become 2, 2 were not transformed into 17, and none of them, not a one, showed the least tendency to become rubies, or emeralds, or vipers, or oxen, or even fish. Protesting wildly, the peasant tried to scuttle around Jack, and so off the pier. Jack, for his part, was equally determined not to allow him to do so. At last, Jack made a lunge for the peasant, and found himself seized by two of his own laughing comrades, hoisted up into the air, and thrown into the Mummelsee. Down, down, down Jack sank, choking. The water was as clear as crystal, and yet far down in the distance as black as coal. So filled with anger at his comrades was he that at first he didn't notice when he stopped choking. Then, before he could properly marvel at this strange turn of circumstance, he was distracted by movements in the depths of the lake. At a distance, the creatures looked like frogs, but as they grew closer, they seemed very much like human beings, save that their skin was green and their clothes were clearly woven of seaweeds. More and more of these water spirits rose up like diving birds and quickly surrounded Jack. So great was their number that he had no choice but to go with them to the very bottom of the Mummelsee. When Jack lightly touched the floor of the lake, he found there waiting for him a sylph, clad in gold and silver, by which token he took this being to be the king of the Mummelsee. "A good day to you, Jack," said the king. "I trust you are well." "God save us from hurt and harm, friend," Jack cried. "But however could you possibly know my name?" "As for that, my dear fellow, I've been reading about you and your adventures. Most recently with those scoundrelly false comrades who threw you into this lake." "What place is this?" Jack asked, "and what manner of people live here?" "Why, as the saying goes, as above, so below. We have farms and cities and churches. Sea horses pull plows in our fields, and sea cows are milked in our barns." So talking, the king of the Mummelsee led Jack along a pleasant road, and then through a forest of giant kelp, which abruptly opened up upon a shining white city. Great were the wonders of that submarine metropolis. The walls of its buildings were so white they glowed. While the streets were not paved with gemstones, many a fresco set into the exterior walls was made of nothing else. There were neither locks on the doors, nor guards at the entrances to the palace, and this was far from the least of the wonders that Jack saw. The greatest wonder of all, so far as Jack was concerned, was the sylph maiden, Posidonia, the king's daughter, who came out to greet her father on his return to the city. The instant he clapped eyes on her, Jack was determined to win her. Nor was that a difficult task, as he was a well-made man, with a soldier's straight bearing, and his frank admiration drew from her a happy blush and no protest whatsoever. Time went by. It may have been days, or it may have been months. Late one afternoon, Jack cleared his throat and hesitantly said, "Tell me something, oh my best and belovedest." "Anything," she replied. "One thing continues to bother me. A small thing, perhaps, but I cannot rid myself of it, however I try. When I first arrived in this rich and splendid land, your father told me he had been reading of my adventures. By what magic? In what unimaginable book?" "Why, in this one, dearest of scoundrels. What other book could it possibly be?" Jack looked from one end of the room to the other and replied, "I see no book." "Well, of course not, silly. If it were here, how could you be in it?" "I cannot say, O delight of my eyes, for your answer makes absolutely no sense to me." "Trust me, he read of you in this book, nor have you ever left it." Now Jack began to feel the stirrings of anger. "This one, you say? Which one? The devil take me if I can make heads or tails of your answers." Then the laughter died in Posidonia's throat, and she exclaimed, "You poor thing, you truly do not understand, do you? If I understood, would I be at this very instant begging you like a fool for a simple and straightforward answer?" She regarded him with a sad little smile. "I think it is time you talked with my father," she said. That's where we'll pause today. So when we pick up next time, we'll see what Jack says to the king, what he asks him about, and what the king means by, "I've been reading about you in this book." Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Bye, everyone.